supercomputer 10,000 years. And as we invest more in our computing power, we will make it available for researchers and businesses, as well as government, so that when the best entrepreneurs in the world think about where they want to start and scale their AI businesses, they choose the UK. And finally, we must target our scientific effort towards what I think of as AI for good. Right across the Western world, we're searching for answers to the question as to how we can improve and increase our productivity. Because that's the only long-term way to grow our economy and raise people's living standards. And in a million different ways across every aspect of our lives, AI can be that answer. In the public sector, we're clamping down on benefit fraudsters, saving billions, and using AI as a co-pilot to help clear backlogs and radically speed up paperwork. Just take, for example, the task of producing bundles for benefits tribunals. Before, a week's work could produce around 11. Now, that takes less than an hour. And just imagine the benefits of that rolled out across the whole of government. In the private sector, startups like Robin AI are revolutionizing the legal profession, writing contracts in minutes, saving businesses and customers time and money. London-based Wave is using sophisticated AI software to create a new generation of electric self-driving cars. But more than all of this, AI can also help us solve some of the greatest social challenges of our time. It can help us finally achieve the promise of nuclear fusion, providing abundant, cheap, clean energy with virtually no emissions. It can help us solve world hunger by making food cheaper and easier to grow, and preventing crop failures by accurately predicting when to plant, harvest, or water your crops. And AI could help find novel dementia treatments or develop vaccines for cancer. And that's why today we're investing a further £100 million to accelerate the use of AI on the most transformational breakthroughs in treatments for previously incurable diseases. Now, I believe nothing in our foreseeable future will be more transformative for our economy, our society, and all our lives than this technology. But in this moment, it is also one of the greatest tests of leadership we face. It would be easy to bury our heads in the sand and hope that it'll turn out all right in the end, to decide it's all too difficult, or that the risks of political failure are too great, to put short-term demands ahead of the long-term interests of the country. But I won't do that. I'll do the right thing, not the easy thing. I'll always be honest with you about the risks, and you can trust me to make the right long-term decisions, giving you the peace of mind that we will keep you safe while making sure that you and your children have all the opportunities for a better future that AI can bring. I feel an extraordinary sense of purpose when I think about why I came into politics, frankly, why almost anyone comes into politics. It's because we want to make life better for people, to give our children and our grandchildren a better future. And we strive hour after hour, policy after policy, just trying to make a difference. And yet, if harnessed in the right way, the power and possibility of this technology could dwarf anything any of us have achieved in a generation. And that's why I make no apology for being pro-technology. It's why I want to seize every opportunity for our country to benefit in the way that I'm so convinced that it can. And it's why I believe we can and should look to the future with optimism and hope. Thank you. We've got some time for questions from the media. Can I start with the BBC?
Hi there, Zoe Kleinman. Prime Minister, you mentioned lots of scenarios there that will sound very scary to lots of people. But I think for many, the threat that's closest to home is jobs. You mentioned yourself AI tools doing administrative tasks that have traditionally been done by humans. What support will there be for the many people who are going to be caught up in the jobs disruption before new AI-focused careers come along?
Thanks, Zoe. Now, I get people will be anxious about AI for all sorts of different reasons. And that's why I'm giving this speech today and why we're taking the actions that we are, to give people the reassurance that we are going to be able to keep them safe and ensure that our country can actually benefit from AI, and something that our children and grandchildren will enjoy a better future as a result of. Now, when it comes to jobs, the first thing to note that AI is already actually creating jobs in our country, employing around 50,000 people in new companies all around the country, doing amazing things. And will continue to be a fantastic place for that type of innovation to take place, for those jobs to be created. And I think also it's important to recognize that AI doesn't just automate and take people's jobs. A better way to think about it is as a co-pilot. So for someone doing a job, what AI can do is provide assistance to that person so that they can do their job better, focus on one particular part of it and have AI do some of the more mundane bits. So actually that's what we're seeing in the welfare example that I gave, where our caseworkers get benefits from AI as someone who's helping, or the AI is helping them to do their casework, put things together so they can do that job far faster, more productively, crack through the backlogs, or identify more benefit fraud. And so thinking about it more as a co-pilot, I think, can hopefully reassure people that it's not in the way that you describe or people worry about. I think that the other thing is, as with all technologies, they change our labour market. I think over time, of course, they make our economy more prosperous, more productive, they create more growth overall, but it does mean that there are changes in the labour market. There's a study from MIT a few years ago that pointed out that at the time that they did this study, something like, I think 60% of all the jobs in the US actually didn't exist 50 or 60 years beforehand. So it's hard to predict the exact evolution of everyone's job, but what we can do in government is make sure that we have a world-class education system. That is the best way that I can ensure that everyone in our country can benefit from not just AI, but everything that comes our way, that they can have a fulfilling future. At the conference, I set out some reforms to our post-16 education system, introducing an advanced British standard that will bring together technical and academic education under one high-quality standard, ensure that our young people all have the basics of maths and English all the way through to 18, bringing us into line with most other of our international peers. And we need to make sure that people can train at any stage in their life. So we're reforming our student finance system with something called the lifelong learning entitlement, so that it's not just about going to university at 18, it's about maybe doing an apprenticeship when you're younger, and then at some point later in your life having access to a student loan to support you to pick up new skills, to go bounce on to your second or third career. So if we can create a world-class education system, then we can ensure that whatever happens in the world, our young people can grow up and know that they're going to have fantastic careers, fantastic jobs, and can provide a better future for their families. And I think that's what I can do to give people that reassurance. Next, can we go to ITV?
Prime Minister, if the risks to humanity are as great as your officials say, you mentioned it aiding the development of chemical weapons, for example, shouldn't we at the very least slow down AI development, at least long enough to understand and control the risks? Or do you think your new task force can keep up with the pace of development? And what will they actually do if they do find any potential issues? And a very quick second question, if I may. Given the situation in Gaza and that it continues to escalate, you've called for humanitarian pauses so that aid and basic utilities can get into the region. But overnight, Israel's Prime Minister has said that he is preparing for a ground invasion. Will you stress your desires directly with him? And are you concerned that he might ignore you?
So look, firstly, on these risks, and now that's why we've taken the step of publishing reports today to give people honesty and transparency about the risks that we see. And one of those is that there are potentially increased risks to safety and security, because what AI does is enhance the ability of bad actors to do bad things. But that's why we're also taking the other steps that I announced, being, I think, a leader anywhere in the world for developing the expertise that we need in government to identify those risks, understand them, and make sure that we can mitigate against them. We already invest far more in AI safety research than any other country in the world. That's what our task force, chaired by Ian, who's here, is doing. And Ian will be able to tell you afterwards, we've been able to attract some of the world's best and brightest people to come and work in that task force because they can see that what we're doing is world leading. So that should give everyone the reassurance that we're ahead of the curve on this, identifying, evaluating, examining what might be coming down the pipe and making sure that we're protected against it. I think the other thing to say is, look, there is debate about whether these risks will manifest at all, and indeed over what time frame. And you can see that debate in the community of AI experts and researchers. But my view is, even if there's uncertainty, the risk could be potentially significant, so it's right that we take all the steps necessary to protect people and keep them safe, and that's what we'll continue to do. So the AI Safety Institute is a good example of that. The summit next week is a further example of that, because we can't do this without working collaboratively with other people, and indeed the companies, which is why it's so crucial that they're involved in the summit next week. Because what we can't do is just put our heads in the sand, as I said, and think that this can either be ignored or that it will just stop happening. You know, it's not going to stop. AI doesn't respect borders. And so what is the right approach for us is to just be ahead of it in developing, as I said, the expertise and capabilities to understand the risk and then mitigate against them. With regard to the situation in Israel and Gaza, now I said for a long time, I've said consistently that we defend Israel's right to defend itself, to protect its people, to act against terrorism. And the UN Charter is very clear on that. And we've also consistently urged the Israelis to follow international law. That's something that I've always pressed with the Israeli Prime Minister, and indeed on my visit to the region last week. And we're doing absolutely everything we can in the UK to get humanitarian aid into the region. I think that's important. People should feel pleased about the role that the UK is playing. We've doubled the amount of financial aid that we provide. A flight took off yesterday, an RAF flight going to Egypt, carrying something like 75,000 tons of aid, which can make an enormous difference. And, you know, alongside, we also want to try and get our British nationals out of Gaza, for the hostages to be released. And we recognise that for all of that to happen, there needs to be a safer environment, which of course necessitates specific pauses, which are distinct from a ceasefire. And that's why we supported the resolution at the United Nations yesterday, which among many other things mentioned that. Can I next go to Sky?
Thank you, Prime Minister. In order to ensure people of their safety, will you compel big tech companies to make, or AI developers in general, will you compel those companies to make the code of their models available and the training data to people working at the AI Safety Institute? Otherwise, we can't really know what those models are capable of. And secondly, given what's in those reports, is it fair to say we know enough already to call for a moratorium on artificial general intelligence, something that's capable of multiple tasks as well as a human? Would you back a moratorium, a ban on AGI?
Yeah, thanks, Art. So, look, on your second question, I don't think it's practical or enforceable. And as a matter of principle, the UK has rightly been an economy, a country, a society that has encouraged innovation for all the good that it can bring. And I think that is the right approach. Now, it's perfectly consistent alongside that to do what we're doing, which is to invest heavily and in advance of others in protecting ourselves against the risks that might be there. You mentioned some specific practical ways that we can do that. That those are all the types of conversations that we need to have with the companies. And that's why it's so important at the summit next week. We're involving not just countries, but we're involving all the leading AI companies and researchers and policy experts to have those conversations, as I said in my speech, about how not only we can develop a shared understanding of the risks, make sure that we then have the capability to evaluate them and examine them, because right now, largely that expertise exists within the companies. That's obviously not appropriate for them to mark their own homework. We need to be able to do that ourselves, and we're building that capability with the experts that we're hiring. And then once we know that, once we have that data and that evidence, then we can decide on the right approach to mitigating those risks and regulating. But it's important that that should be based on empirical evidence. But the things that you mentioned about, there are all lots of different ways that we can go about that, and that's exactly the conversation that we'll be having next week with the companies. And I would say they have already, uniquely given the UK and our task force, privileged access to those models. Right. So I think we're in a good place compared to almost everyone else to develop that expertise, because in an ideal world, what you're saying is right, ideally, and as I said in my statement, what we want to be able to move towards, and that's what my vision is where at least on an international basis, hopefully led by the UK because of our expertise, we can ensure the safety of new models before they're released, and that's obviously preferable, and that's what we will continue to work towards, but we've got to start the conversation somewhere, and that's what we're doing next week.
No red lines. As things stand, there are no red lines for you, because I think that's what people want to hear. They want, in order to persuade people, given the harms and the risks that you've pointed out in this latest report, and some of those harms are profound, surely there must be some red lines we can draw at this point, and which ones are yours?
Well, I think the point is, again, it's not to be alarmist, because the most extreme risks that we talk about in the report are not ones that anyone can have certainty will manifest themselves, or indeed, even if they believe that they will, they're not certain about the time frame. So, and there are a considerable number of people who are experts in the field who don't think those risks will manifest at all, right? So I think it is important to understand that there is a significant degree of debate about them, but they are a possibility, which is why we want to be transparent with people. But actually, the reassurance I'm giving is that we are ahead of almost any other country, if not every other country, in developing the expertise that we need in government to be able to keep people safe. And that's the key message to take away from this, is I think people know that these things might pose a risk, but what I want to get across is we're doing more than anyone else to protect you against those risks by the research that we're doing, the investment in people and our approach to it, and our collaboration with the companies and other countries. And we will strengthen all our tools next week by working with other people, and then more practically putting in steps to make sure that as the technology develops, we can ensure that it's being done in a way that is safe. So that is the ultimate vision. But I think the main takeaway is we're ahead of this, and we're doing more than others, and that's the right thing to do, given what may, not with certainty, be coming down the line. Next, we go to the Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Sticking with your smorgasbord of doom you've published this morning, AI-powered terrorists, hackers, fake sextortion, even a robot tax. You say we shouldn't be losing sleep over this stuff. If not, why not? And which AI threat is keeping you up most, worrying about at night? And if I may, your deputy this morning said that the UN Secretary General should withdraw his comments justifying Hamas's slaughter of 1,400 Israelis. Do you agree those comments should be withdrawn? And do you agree with Oliver Dowden that the UN has an anti-Israeli bias? Thank you.
So I think our position on the situation has been clear from the beginning, and there's one person responsible for what happened, and that's Hamas. And they perpetrated an appalling act of terrorism which has harmed very many people and caused untold suffering, and they alone are responsible for that. And we've made that very clear in all our public statements, and indeed at the UN, and indeed in the resolution that we supported yesterday. But I was going to slightly push back on your characterization, Harry, and I think actually we shouldn't do it in the way that you described, because whilst there are potential risks, and that's why it's right that we're transparent about them, it's worth, again, recognizing the incredible benefits that this technology is already bringing and will continue to bring. And I think it's not that often in human society, civilization, where technologies come along that have the transformative power that AI does, where it can transform every aspect of the economy, of public services, of society, how we live our lives. As I said, I just came from Moorfields Eye Hospital, where, again, it's the UK leading the world in using what are actually relatively common retinal scans that you would do at typical high street opticians, which can then be looked at using AI in a way that can identify not just eye disease and blindness, but multiple other health conditions like strokes and Parkinson's, years before anyone else would realize that that was a problem for that individual. And that's an experimental thing that's being developed. To give you another example, there's another company that's using a form of AI-powered lip reading technology. So people who have had stroke or trauma and have trouble speaking, and that company is able to turn the movement of their lips into words and essentially giving them the power of speech when it's been lost. So I think it's wrong to focus and say it's all doom and gloom, because every which way you look at it, whether it's in healthcare, education, or every aspect of our economy or public services, AI is already doing things that are saving us money, making things quicker, improving people's lives. And that is something that, again, we want to make sure that the UK is leading the world in. And that's why all the other things that we're doing to build a really innovative economy here are important. But I think that's directly linked to the safety, because the future of AI is safe AI. So if we can lead the world in AI safety, that will have the side benefit of just attracting far more of the world's best companies and researchers and entrepreneurs here to the UK, to mean that it's UK families that are benefiting first from all these innovations, and that we can create all those jobs and opportunities here at home. So that's my vision for the future of AI. I think it's going to be transformative and incredibly powerful, and I'm confident in that because we're doing more than anyone else to ensure that we can manage the risks, and that's what you'll see next week as well. If we go to the Daily Mail next.
Thanks, Prime Minister. On China, are you able to confirm who is attending next week's summit for them? And I know you've touched on it, but just to be clear, why are MPs like Ian Duncan-Smith wrong when they say China shouldn't have been invited and that we're cozying up to them too much? And just a quick question on the fact you're now facing another by-election, if I may. If you lose Wellingborough, won't it surely be a sign that it's finally time for tax cuts to get things back on track?
Well, I think there's, as I said, lots of things in by-elections which are always difficult for incumbent governments, as I talked about the other week, and we're just going to carry on delivering for the country. And when it comes to tax cuts, I've always been clear, of course I want to cut people's taxes. I'm a Conservative, I believe in that. But the priority, and when I became Prime Minister, was to bring inflation down. And as I said then, and the biggest tax cut we can deliver for the country is to halve inflation, because it's inflation that makes people poorer, pushes up the prices of things, eats into your savings. And that's very much following in the tradition of Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson. And I believe that is the right economic policy. And as I said, as we bring inflation down, and then is the time to look forward. And of course, I want to deliver a lower tax economy for the country. And I'm confident that we will. But first, we have to make sure that inflation is brought down. And with regard to China, look, I can't say with 100% certainty that China will be there, but I do believe that it's absolutely the right thing to have invited them. Yeah, AI, China is, unquestionably the world's second AI power behind the US. That's just a fact when you look at the amount of research, investment, and activity that's happening there. And AI doesn't respect borders. So if you're seriously trying to address this issue, then it's right to try and engage with the world's leading AI powers. It doesn't mean that it's going to be successful, doesn't mean you're going to agree on everything, but you should certainly try and engage with them, because a proper solution to AI over time is going to require an international solution. And whether China attends is obviously up to them. And as you said, it's not an easy decision to invite China, and there'll be people who disagree with it, but I do believe it's the right thing, and it's very consistent with our foreign policy strategy that we published earlier this year, which is to protect ourselves against threats that other countries, whoever they are, may pose to us, align ourselves in our approach with our allies, which when it comes to China, we are completely in lockstep with our closest allies like America, like Australia, like Canada, like Japan and others in our approach to China. And thirdly, to engage where it makes sense. When you're tackling global issues, whether it's climate change, pandemics, or indeed AI, those problems require international collaboration, and the sensible, practical thing to do if you're protecting yourself where you need to and you're aligned with your allies is to engage where it makes sense, and that's our approach. All right, next, can we go to the iNews?
Thank you, Prime Minister. You talked a lot about building the expertise and building the sort of long-term structures. You haven't really talked about whether your government is actually going to regulate. Are you planning to pass specific regulations? Will there be an AI bill or similar in the King's speech? Or is what you're saying today that it's too early to do anything like that? And specifically on the details of that regulation, does the government remain committed to this idea of responsible scaling, whereby you sort of test models after they've been developed for whether they're safe enough? Or is it time to start thinking about how you intervene to stop the most dangerous models being developed at all?
I'd say on your second question, that's what we touched on before. Clearly, the future vision would be one where you can ensure the safety of things before they're released. And obviously, these things are iterative, and that's why close collaboration with the companies themselves is important. That's why it's important that they're a key part of the summit next week. And as I said, I think we're fortunate, almost, I think, uniquely, being the country where the large models have shared access with us before anyone else, which I'm very grateful to them for, and it's been a very constructive engagement so far. Now, on regulation, I think we shouldn't be in a rush to regulate for a couple of reasons. First of all, is just principled one, is because our economy and our approach historically has been to encourage innovation, because I think it brings benefits for the most part. So I think in general that's the right approach. But also, secondly, it's hard to regulate something if you don't fully understand it. Right? That regulation should be based on empirical evidence, and that's why the right sequencing for this is what we're doing, which is to invest heavily, and more so than anyone else, in developing the capabilities in government to understand those risks. That's why the AI Safety Institute, building on the work of the task force, is so important. And as we then understand what the risks, if they manifest themselves, then we'll be in a far better place to figure out what is the appropriate action to take at that moment, because it will be based empirically on findings that we have made. Because when you're dealing with something that is so fast-moving and indeed not fully understood, even by the people who are developing the technology themselves, I think it's hard to stand here and say, well, this is precisely the best way to regulate it. So I think first to build the understanding, and then we can maintain our pro-innovation approach, and then move to something more practical down the line when we know exactly what we're dealing with. But look, we have published a AI regulation white paper in spring of this year, which set out some cross-cutting principles that we think are important to us, and Michelle is championing that work, and that's been a very good conversation and engagement with the industry. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think the world looks to us to do this, because we as a country get this right. We tend to take a principles-based, proportionate approach to regulation that protects the things that we need to protect, whilst allowing the maximum amount of innovation to happen here. That is the hallmark of the UK. That's why we have such successful innovative sectors in technology and life sciences and financial services, and we need to not lose that as we think about AI. So that's why I think our approach is absolutely the right one for the country. Next, we go to the Telegraph.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Can I ask, what's your take on the prospect of a robot tax to protect jobs from rapid automation? Is that something you would consider? And just very quickly on Gaza, if I may, what is the plan for evacuating British citizens who are trapped there?
So I think on the second one, I think I'd probably refer to the answer that we had right at the beginning on the BBC. I think the right approach is to make sure that we have the world's best education system. And that's what we're doing with the reforms of the Advanced British Standards, lifelong learning entitlement, doubling down on apprenticeships. Those are all examples of how to ensure that people can have fantastic opportunities in life with whatever's changing because of technology. Look, in terms of evacuating our nationals from Gaza, it's obviously a complex situation on the ground. There are around 200 that the Foreign Office is in contact with, that we have been for a while. And obviously that's been a feature of all my engagement in the region and on the phone with leaders, particularly in Egypt and in Israel. We're very keen to be able to bring them out and bring them home. What I can tell you is we've pre-positioned border force teams to Egypt so that, you know, if there is a possibility for our nationals to cross the Rafah crossing, we're ready to get them and bring them back. And I've had that reassurance as well from the Egyptian president that they will work with us on that. And so look, we stand ready to do that, but obviously, as you know, there's a lot of complexity on the ground around the Rafah crossing and the security situation there. So it's not something we can do immediately. But you know, when the moment arises, we'll be ready to take it quickly. And I think we've also, for those people that were in Israel and wanted to leave, you know, over the course of, I think, more than 15 different flights, military and charter, that we organised, have been able to take about 900 people out who wanted to leave, and those have now stopped because the demand has gone. So that was completed successfully. The travel advice in Lebanon, as you know, has changed, and there are still dozens of commercial flights that are leaving from there. So I'd urge people to just, in all cases, follow the Foreign Office travel advice, because it is a dynamic situation on the ground. But we'll obviously do everything we can to get our nationals out, and then particularly also in the West Bank, where There are a smaller number, but again, some have started to be able to leave, and we stand ready to support them as well. And then I think lastly, the Times.
Thank you, Prime Minister. A lot of the risks you've spoken about today are in the future, but there are a lot of risks now as well. We heard just yesterday that paedophiles, for example, are using AI to nudify children or de-age celebrities, and chatbots have been used to encourage crimes. So if the Pandora's box is already open, what are we doing now? And then secondly, how worried are you about AI in the next election? And if you are worried, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's it's a good one to end on. So obviously it's very worrying when you see stories about AI-generated child sexual abuse materials. And I think I just want to be crystal clear. The UK law is already crystal clear on this issue. AI-generated child sexual abuse material remains illegal. Right? There is nothing legal about it. So in the first instance, it is already illegal to be doing that. Now, thanks to the work of Michelle and her department and our new online safety bill, we have a set of powers and tools that enable us to have that content removed. And obviously the bill gives us the power to fine companies when they're not complying with the regulation. So again, that bill is, I think, world leading. We're ahead of the curve and giving ourselves the power we need to deal with that type of material because it's awful. And this technology allows people to do new things with it, but we're ready to deal with it thanks to the law that we passed. And then on your kind of other point, AI systems absolutely shouldn't undermine people's rights, discriminate unfairly, and you talk about things like bias. And one thing I'd say on that is the task force that we have, which is the prototype for the institution, has already done quite a lot of work on what we call social harms, and it will be presenting these on the first day of the summit next week, specifically on bias and disinformation. And those evaluations will be demonstrated, and you can get a sense of what we're doing, and that work is, as I say, already happening and will continue. And the foreign policy or security strategy that I mentioned earlier also created something called the Defending Democracy Task Force, which is funded to protect the integrity of the UK from foreign influence, interference with our elections. It involves the intelligence services. It reports directly to me via the National Security Council. And again, whether it's the Online Safety Bill, where we have powers to remove or get that content removed, also the new National Security Act that we passed modernises all our counter-espionage and foreign interference laws. So it allows us to deal with those new threats, which definitely are there. And again, we've been ahead of the curve in making sure that we have the tools and capabilities we need to protect the country and the integrity of our elections against them. Good. Thank you very much for your time.